Well, hello and welcome back to our continuing story of God. And we're discussing heaven and hell. And we are now on, I believe, our fifth lesson as we've been talking about heaven and hell. If you haven't had a chance to check out the previous lessons, you might want to do this because this is a series that is building upon itself. Today, we're going to be looking at the concept of Gehenna before Christ. If you watched last week's lesson, you know that we were talking about the concept of Gehenna as it was used by Jesus in the Gospels. In the Gospels, we see that Jesus used the word Gehenna 11 times. His brother James used it one time in his letter. And those 12 occurrences are the only places in the New Testament where the word Gehenna appears. And we saw last week that the word Gehenna, it's a Greek transliteration of a Hebrew phrase, Gehinnom, which literally means the valley of the son of Hinnom. What we saw last week in Jesus' use of the word Gehenna is that he didn't really tell us a whole lot about Gehenna itself. Didn't tell us where it was, generally speaking, who went there. He didn't tell us how long people stayed there, didn't tell us a whole lot about Gehenna. And I think that's deliberate because in the context that he was using or that he was teaching something more important than Gehenna itself. And that was how we should live our lives. He was using Gehenna as a tool to motivate right living. And he wasn't necessarily trying to give us a lexicon definition of Gehenna or an encyclopedia type article about Gehenna. But we do glean a few little things from some of the snippets that he does say. We see that it's a place of eternal fire, and it has undying worms. That's why I'm putting it. It talks about where the worm dieth not in Gehenna. It's a possible destination for those who call their brother a fool. That's from the Sermon on the Mount, where he says that if you call your brother a fool, you are in danger of the Gehenna of fire. And that's why I say it's a possible destination. He says you are in danger of the Gehenna of fire. He doesn't say you're absolutely going there. He just says you're in danger of it. It's also a possible destination if your hands or your eyes or your feet cause you to stumble. And again, with a couple exceptions, he doesn't really necessarily explain what that means. However, in the passage about the eye stumbling, he says this in the Sermon on the Mount again, right after saying that if a man looks at a woman lustfully, he has committed adultery with her in his heart. So if you know, if you're looking at somebody lustfully, then it could be argued that your eye is causing you to stumble. And he's suggesting here that it's better to pluck out your eye than to go into Gehenna with two eyes. That's a frightening statement. I don't know of anybody who's ever actually done that literally. And yet we know that the lust of the eyes is very prevalent. But I've never known any Christian who has taken this passage so literally that they plucked out their eyes. Now, Origen of Alexandria, back in the 3rd century, he did take these passages literally with respect to his body. I won't go into the details into this Sunday school lesson, but if you know the history of Origen, you understand what I'm talking about. If you don't know the history, you can go ahead and look it up. I'm sure even a Wikipedia article will explain what happened. Also, Jesus tells us that Gehenna is a place of destruction. He talks about destroying both bodies and souls. So it's a place of destruction of both bodies and souls. Beyond that, he doesn't say a whole lot. And so as we read through the Gospels, as we read through Jesus' statements about Gehenna, we get the impression, at least I get the impression, that his listeners knew what he was talking about. Now we know that the King James translators, actually, I believe Wycliffe in the 1300s, certainly the Geneva Bible of the 1500s, the Bishop's Bible that came on long after that, and the Great Bible, and the King James Bible. All of these Bibles translated Gehenna as hell. But this is 13, 14, 1500 years after the fact. And so the translators thought that Jesus was referring to hell. Now, keep in mind, however, that at that time, hell didn't mean the fiery final destination of the wicked in the English language. It referred more to Sheol and Hades, which we have seen are temporary holding cells, if you will, until final judgment. And so it's hard for me to understand exactly what the King James translators were envisioning when they translated this word Gehenna as hell. And so, but anyway, we know that the translators translated it as hell. Is that what his first century hearers or listeners understood him to mean? Keep in mind that they didn't speak English. English as a language didn't exist at that time. So when they heard the word Gehenna, what came into their mind? And that's what we want to look at today. We want to look at the history of this word Gehenna before Christ. Now, I will say, as I've been reviewing my slides, it occurs to me that if I say everything I want to say in this lesson, it's going to be an hour long, and I don't want to do that. So I'm probably going to break this up into 2 lessons, each one much shorter, and so you don't have to strain your attention span. So this week and next week go together very tightly. So make sure you come back next week and watch part 2 of Gehenna before Christ. Today, what I want to do is look at what the Bible actually says about Gehenna. And then next week, we'll look at what other sources said about Gehenna all before Christ came along. What I'm trying to do with this is get a sense in my own mind as to what Jesus' listeners might have believed that he meant when he used the word Gehenna. And this lesson has been fascinating, but at the same time kind of frustrating, because I'm not getting the clear black and white answers that I want. So with that, let's look at what the Old Testament actually says about Gehenna. Excuse me. Joshua 15:8, this is the first time we see it mentioned in the Bible. And here we're just simply describing geography. The border went up by the valley of the son of Hinnom to the side of the Jebusite, also called Jerusalem, southward. And the border went up to the top of the mountain that lies before the valley of Hinnom westward, which is at the farthest part of the valley of Rephaim northward. Now, you almost have to be an engineer to follow the metes and bounds of that description. So let me make it a little bit easier for us. And there's a little map up here. And let me scroll down so we can actually see this. Okay, here we've got Jerusalem. Okay, bring my little cursor over here. Here we have Zion, the city of David. This is Mount Zion, which I think is very significant. As you go throughout the Bible, Mount Zion is the metaphor for salvation. Just to orient us, over here is the temple, the Mount of Olives over here. And then right down here, below and adjacent to Mount Zion, you go down the hill into the valley of the son of Hinnom. So there it is. There is hell right there, the valley of the son of Hinnom. And it's right there just to the south and southwest of the city of David, Jerusalem. Today, Jerusalem is a much larger city and it expands far out beyond this. So the valley of the son of Hinnom would be in the inner city area of current Jerusalem. But there it is. It's a geographical location on the map. You can see it in the Old Testament. The valley of the son of Hinnom is nothing more, nothing less than a physical geographic location on earth. Now, I would say that the word Gehenna itself doesn't necessarily appear in the Old Testament, but it always refers to the valley of the son of Hinnom, which is the transliteration of Gehenna. So what happened in Gehenna? We're looking at history now. And the Bible gives us history. Some horrible, horrible things happened in this valley. 2 Chronicles 28, 1-3. Here we're talking about the whole list of kings. You have good kings, bad kings. Most kings were bad. And we're talking about King Ahaz here. He was 20 years old when he began to reign. And he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do that which was right in Yahweh's eyes, like David, his father. But he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel and also made molten images for the Baals. Moreover, he burned incense in the valley of the son of Hinnom and burned his children in the fire. This is a Jewish king burning his children in the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom, according to the abominations of the nations whom Yahweh cast out before the children of Israel. There's so much history in these three verses, and I'm just trying to wrap my arms around all this in terms of humanity and human history and what's going on here. This reference to burning children in the fire, as we'll see in a couple verses, a couple slides, this is a reference to making actual child sacrifices to the god Molech or Moloch, depending on how you spell it. And that was specifically prohibited by God, by Moses in Leviticus. It said, you shall not give any of your children as a sacrifice to Molech. You shall not profane the name of your God. I am Yahweh. And so there is the law prohibiting what Ahaz was doing. Ahaz was sacrificing his children to Molech in the valley of the son of Hinnom. And Moses had previously prohibited that very practice. Ahaz wasn't the only one to do this. Go a few more chapters into Chronicles, and we see Manasseh. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. He too did that which was evil in Yahweh's sight, after the abominations of the nations whom Yahweh cast out before the children of Israel. He also made his children to pass through the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom. He practiced sorcery, divination, witchcraft, and dealt with those who had familiar spirits and with wizards. He did much evil in Yahweh's sight to provoke him to anger. Things aren't looking good here for Judah. You have two kings now who are causing their children to pass through the fire. They're sacrificing children in the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom. This is the valley that is called Gehenna in the New Testament. Well, we all know that King Josiah is a good king. Interesting, Josiah, his name means the fire of God. Keep that in the back of your mind as we go through some of this stuff. And there's so much hidden meaning in so much of this that it's really kind of cool. So in 2 Kings 22, and then also in chapter 23, we get some snippets about what King Josiah did with the Valley of Hinnom. Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. So he 39 years old and he was gone. His mother's name was Jedidah, the daughter of Adiah of Boskath. He did that which was right in Yahweh's eyes, hallelujah, and walked in the way of David his father and didn't turn away to the right or to the left. Then the rest of chapter 22 deals with reforms that Josiah instituted. He repairs the temple. He starts killing priests. He starts doing this, doing that, and makes a great conflagration, basically. Then in chapter 23 and verse 10, it says this: he defiled Topheth which is in the valley of the children of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or his daughter to pass through the fire to Molech. Okay, so we have the reference to Molech there. So this is a reference back to Ahaz and Manasseh, who both sacrificed children in the fire of Gehenna. And here Josiah is responding to it. Now we see a couple things here. It says he defiled Topheth. I wish there was a greater description as to actually what he physically did, but it sounds like he's messing the place up, defiling in such a way that people cannot sacrifice children to the fire of Molech. He is desecrating the whole place. Topheth, interesting history on this word, and there's some disagreement among scholars as to what it actually means. One view, which is very disturbing to hear, but it seems to be the predominant view, is that Topheth comes from a word that means drum. And the idea here is that when the sacrifices of the children were being made into the valley of the son of Hinnom, people up on the sides of the valley would loudly beat drums in order to drown out the cries of the children who were being burned. I can't fathom this. I'm sorry, I just can't fathom this. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, and now I'm just trying to picture what's going on here. He defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the children of Hinnom. So that's what Josiah is doing in response. I don't know about the drums, but that's the one explanation of what Topheth means. At any rate, the valley of the children of Hinnom, a son of Hinnom, it also has this name Topheth, which refers to that area. All right, so God obviously is going to have a reaction to what is going on here. And this reaction is recorded in Jeremiah. At the beginning of Jeremiah, we read that he begins his writing during the time of Josiah. So we've just come out of Asa and Manasseh and their abominations. Josiah is trying to fix things. Jeremiah is a prophet during his time. Josiah has a few more kings following him: Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, Zedekiah, and several other kings. And Jeremiah is writing throughout the span of these kings. Several of these kings reigned for very short periods of time. And Jeremiah is writing right before the Babylonian exile and the initial destruction of Jerusalem and its temple. That is a very, very important thing for us to keep in mind. What Jeremiah is writing about are earthly things happening within the history of earth. So Jeremiah 7:31-32. This is God talking. They have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I didn't command, nor did it come into my mind. Oh, hallelujah, that we can read this statement, that our God is such, the character of God is such, that the thought of sacrificing sons and daughters to Molech in the valley of Hinnom never even entered his mind. I don't know how that fits with an omniscient God who knows everything, but this is what they're telling us about the character of God here. He is such that the idea of sacrificing babies to a false god in a valley of fire doesn't even come into his mind. And I say hallelujah that they're telling us that. Therefore, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that it will no more be called Topheth or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. For they will bury in Topheth until there is no place to bury. Wow. So now God is pronouncing judgment through the pen of Jeremiah. There's going to be judgment now on Judah. There's going to be a slaughter. They're going to bury people until there's no place to bury them. He repeats this in Jeremiah 19. Therefore, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that this place will no more be called Topheth, nor the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. I will make the counsel of Judah and Jerusalem void in this place. I will cause them to fall by the sword before their enemies and by the hand of those who seek their life. I will give their dead bodies to be food for the birds of the sky and for the animals of the earth. You start to get the imagery of a worm that dies not in this valley, eating the flesh of the dead bodies of all of these people. All of this is being prophesied by Jeremiah. This is what is going to happen to Judah because Judah is messing things up so badly. And this is even in light of Josiah's attempt at reform. This abomination of burning babies in a valley to a false god, that's something that God isn't going to let slide. So we go back to 2 Chronicles, and now we see Jeremiah's prophecy being fulfilled. Therefore, he brought on them the king of the Chaldeans, who killed their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on young man or virgin, or old man or gray-headed. He gave them all into his hand. They burned God's house and broke down the wall of Jerusalem. They burned God's house. This is the destruction of the temple, the first temple. They broke down the wall of Jerusalem and burned all its places with fire and destroyed all of its valuable vessels. He carried those who had escaped from the sword away to Babylon, and they were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill Yahweh's word by Jeremiah's mouth. Okay, so now we have this valley of the son of Hinnom. There are sacrifices taking place in this valley. God saying, I never commanded this. It never even entered my mind that you would even think of doing this. But God's going to bring judgment upon Israel or Judah for everything that's happening. The kingdom is split now, Israel and Judah. This is the Judah side of things. And God's going to bring judgment. He prophesies this judgment through the pen of Jeremiah in his prophecy. So we've got the valley of the son of Hinnom, literal physical valley, sacrifices to Molech. It's used by Jeremiah to prophesy literal physical destruction, and this happens. The prophecy comes true. So we've got a prophecy of destruction of the temple within literal human history, and it literally comes true. Babylon exile, Babylon takes over, the Chaldeans help out, and everything's going on. In addition to this, I'm just going to throw this out in terms of the history of this valley before Christ. And at this point in time, we're just simply talking about earthly human history. We're not talking about spiritual dimensions of this. But we have Gehenna has been largely and often described as Jerusalem's garbage dump. You see this description over and over again. It is repeated so often that it is simply accepted as historical fact that Gehenna was Jerusalem's garbage dump. And the idea here is that perhaps this developed after the second destruction of the temple in 70 AD, or maybe even before then. The problem with this whole theory, or this whole historical teaching, is that, at least according to the resources that I've read, and they all seem pretty consistent on this, the oldest document talking about Gehenna as Israel's garbage or Jerusalem's garbage dump dates back to a Rabbi David Kimhi, I'm butchering his pronunciation, I'm sure, back in the 12th century AD. There doesn't seem, though nobody has been able to point to, at least to my knowledge, any written document prior to the 12th century that refers to Gehenna as Jerusalem's garbage dump. And the whole idea, the whole story that developed out of this is that you had Gehenna was a garbage dump for Jerusalem. It was constantly on fire because the government would set the garbage on fire to be incinerated in Gehenna, in this valley. And so you had this constant smoldering garbage dump thing going on. This is in addition to the sacrificing of children that took place hundreds and hundreds of years before all this. Jeremiah, all of that history was about 600 AD, if I'm getting my dates right. And those of you who know your Old Testament better than I do, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Jeremiah and all that was happening around the 600s BC. If I said AD, I meant BC. 600s BC. The whole idea of a garbage dump, they're saying that this happened before Christ, but again, the oldest and earliest historical recording that we have of anybody talking about Gehenna as a garbage dump is this rabbi in the 12th century. So as a result, you have people on all sides of the hell debate saying, yes, Gehenna was a garbage dump. No, it wasn't a garbage dump. There are some who say, yes, it was this ever-burning garbage dump. And therefore, when Jesus talked about it, he was referring to an eternally burning garbage dump. And then the argument goes one of two ways. One is that it's a literal garbage dump and nothing more than that. And that's all Jesus was referring to. And therefore, there isn't a spiritual hell to speak of. The other argument is, yes, it was an ever-burning physical garbage dump in Jerusalem, which Jesus used as a metaphor for the spiritual hell. And so you've got extreme liberals and extreme conservatives both saying that Gehenna was a garbage dump, and then they're both using the idea of the garbage dump to support their own theories about hell. On the flip side, you have people on both sides, conservatives and liberals, saying, no, Gehenna was never a garbage dump. I mean, it just simply wasn't a garbage dump. And what they're trying to do is combat the other side's use of Gehenna as the garbage dump in support of their own idea. So it's kind of interesting because the first time I saw this argument that Gehenna is not a garbage dump was in Francis Chan's book, Erasing Hell. And that's where I got this notion that Rabbi David here is the oldest person or the earliest voice for Gehenna as a garbage dump. And Francis Chan in his book, Erasing Hell, is obviously arguing for a literal spiritual hell. And he's saying that, and he's arguing against the Gehenna as a garbage dump because he perceives that it is the universalists who are using the myth of Gehenna as a garbage dump to support their cause. On the flip side, I just read this week an article by a gentleman who does not believe in a literal eternal spiritual hell. And he's saying that the same thing that Francis was saying, no, this garbage dump myth is just simply that, a myth, because he's trying to combat the people who are arguing that there is a literal spiritual hell where people burn forever. So people on both sides of the debate say both things about Gehenna as a garbage dump. I'm just going to leave it alone. There's nothing in the Bible that talks about Gehenna as a garbage dump. And I wouldn't expect there to be, because the Bible was closed at the time of Ezra around the 400 BC. Malachi, the last book written, 300, 400, thereabouts BC. So any use of Gehenna as a garbage dump would have started after that. So I wouldn't expect the Old Testament to talk about Gehenna as a garbage dump if, in fact, it was used in that way. So we don't know. I mean, to my knowledge, it's not used as a garbage dump today. I don't think anybody's ever mentioned that. The oldest record of it comes from Rabbi David. To me, it's irrelevant whether it was used as a garbage dump or not. I guess it's only relevant if, in fact, that's what the first century listeners of Jesus understood. But again, we don't have any way of knowing that. What we do know is that in the history of the Valley of Hinnom, it was used as a place of sacrifice. God used it as a place of judgment, and you can get all kinds of metaphors going on there. But I want to finish this with the rest of the story. Jeremiah prophesies judgment on Judah for this practice of sacrificing children in the Valley of Hinnom. This judgment takes place in the Valley of Hinnom, but there is the rest of the story, and this comes in Jeremiah 32. And listen to this. This covers about 3 slides. I'm just going to read through it. For this city has been to me a provocation of my anger and of my wrath, from the day that they built it even to this day, so that I should remove it from before my face, because of all the evil of the children of Israel and of the children of Judah, which they have done to provoke me to anger. They, their kings, their princes, their priests, their prophets, the men of Judah, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, they have turned their backs to me and not their faces. Although I taught them rising up early and teaching them, yet they have not listened to receive instruction. But they set their abominations in the house which is called by my name to defile it. Wow, this is the indictment against Judah and Israel. Okay, this is the indictment. This is what Israel has done. And included in all of this was the sacrifice of children to Moloch in the valley of the son of Hinnom. But the story goes on. They built the high places of Baal, which are in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to cause their sons and their daughters to pass through fire to Moloch, which I didn't command them. It didn't even come into my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin. Now, therefore, Yahweh, the God of Israel, says concerning this city, about which you say it is given into the hand of the king of Babylon by the sword, by the famine, and by the pestilence. Okay, so now up to verse 30, through the end of verse 36, we've got the judgment. We have the sin, we have the judgment. The judgment is that they are going to Babylon. The judgment is that there was destruction in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is destroyed. The temple is destroyed. All of this is destroyed. And there's destruction. But that's not the end of the story. Behold, in verse 37, I will gather them out of all the countries where I have driven them, in my anger and in my wrath and in great indignation. And I will bring them again to this place. I will cause them to dwell safely. Then they will be my people, and I will be their God. I will give them one heart and one way, that they may fear me forever for their good and the good of their children after them. I will make an everlasting covenant with them, that I will not turn away from following them to do them good. I will put my fear in their hearts, that they may not depart from me. Yes, I will rejoice over them to do them good, and I will plant them in this land assuredly with my whole heart and with my whole soul. For Yahweh says, just as I have brought all this great evil on this people, so I will bring on them all the good that I have promised them. That's the rest of the story. There is a restorative, redemptive purpose to God's wrath, anger, and judgment. We see it here in Jerusalem, in Jeremiah. We see it in other places in the Old Testament. And I'm going to have a lesson about that whole concept, the restoration of God's judgment. As I read this, and as I think with the mind of a 21st century Christian, I'm not thinking about God's restoration of Judah. I'm thinking about all those human beings who died by the sword during the judgment. What's happening to those individuals? And one of the things I think I have to remember as I read the Old Testament, this wasn't a book written about individuals and what happens to individuals. This is a story of a national covenant, a covenant that God gave to a nation that has fallen away and a nation that is being restored. When I try to get down into the weeds of what's happening to individuals, I'm trying to read something into the story that God never intended to tell me. But the story is there to show me the heart of God, that God is judging, God is pouring out his wrath and his anger, but he does it with a redemptive purpose. And he makes this purpose known to the people of Judah through the mouth of Jeremiah. That's encouraging to me. That shows me that God doesn't give up. He didn't give up on Judah. He had made a promise to them all the way back with Abraham. He had made a covenant. He's going to keep that covenant. And part of that covenant is that through Abraham, all the other nations of the world are going to be blessed. And so that's what we're seeing unfolding in Revelation 21 and 22 when we get to the new heaven and the new earth. This is a very earthly story. Everything that we read about the valley of the son of Hinnom in the Old Testament is about earthly history, things happening on earth, God judging people on earth, God restoring people on earth. This is a very earthly story. Let's keep that in the back of our minds. I'm closing out this part of the lesson. We'll come back next week and we'll see what people had to say about Gehenna after the end of Malachi was written, after the Old Testament is closed. There's a whole bunch of other things being written, and people are saying things about Gehenna, and we have to ask the question, how did those teachings get incorporated into what Jesus was talking about when he used the word heaven, or used the word Gehenna? And that's where things get really dicey, and they get really controversial because there's a lot of differences of belief about all the things that everybody said after the end of the Old Testament, but before the beginning of the New Testament. And that's the history that helps us to understand, I think, what the people in first century Judaism believed when Jesus used the word Gehenna. So with that, I'm going to close it down today. Come back next week. We'll finish out this part of the story about Gehenna, and then we'll move on.